I mean, you ask what comes first. Is it the food, people being hungry, or the monetary system collapsing? And I'm watching the monetary system collapse as we sit here and speak. And it's patterns. It's always patterns. So you're talking about the long cycle, but I can also talk about the currency life cycles when we go into a government system that collapses. And we're at the very end. All of those financial instruments, when they do implode, or the money, we go into the hyperinflation. Now, when will that happen in earnest? Well, I feel like we're at the beginning of it, no doubt about it.
Check this out. Many people today struggle to manage their weight, but this is more true than ever after the age of 20, because after the age of 20, our body's metabolism slows down by as much as 4% every decade. By the time we're 50, we've experienced a 10% drop or more in our metabolism. That's a risk to health. That's why I highly recommend adaptwithketo.com. This product works by increasing the ketone levels inside your body, which in turn support boosted metabolism. A scoop a day, I saw improvements for my energy levels while working on the farm. And the best part is I never had to cut out carbs or make other changes to my diet. If you've been looking for a great way to support your weight loss goals, you'll love adaptwithketo.com. Take 51% off for the next 24 hours. Adaptwithketo.com, or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video. Good afternoon, everyone. This will be one of the most important interviews that you're going to watch through the entire year on timelines. Money and food. Important for both, keeps your body alive, yet allows you to buy things to be able to prepare for the future. Have with me Lynette Zang, ITM Trading. You can check out their YouTube channel. Incredible amounts of information on where the reset might start, the triggers for the reset, how you want to protect your wealth. So how do you protect during these cataclysmic economic times? And how do you protect during these cataclysmic protein deficient times? I'm just going to preface it by saying we live in a world of cycles. Time is not linear as we've been taught since birth. Cycles return. The world's been based on cycles since time immemorial. That's why the heavens spin, why we have the beginning of a new year, why the zodiac works. Understanding the amplification of solar cycles in terms of centuries, millennia. So these cycles are built in. The mythologies and science today can prove that we're in cycles. Our solar system revolving around another solar system and another star is also an orbit in itself that can be calculated. Above the ecliptic, below the ecliptic, you know where we sit today, 220 million years in the future, we'll come back to the same exact spot. Those kind of length of cycles have been known, mapped out. So what are the effects on our world here? Do you think these stories of legends of breaths of dragons, maybe they were referencing solar winds, the pouring out of the heavens? Well, maybe that was some sort of effect electromagnetically that caused static electricity to build up in cloud layers and ring out the heavens, literally. So when we go back through myth, legend, prophecy, we come to right this time. I mean, look at these cycles. And that's the way to preface it. But who would have very specific information about the cycles, understand the change of society and civilization was at the crux of time right now? And if you knew that information, would you not try to continue to control power moving through the cycle, controlling, riding on top of a natural cycle to retain power during the collapse moving through? Fertilizer shortages were inbound here anyway. 13% global fertilizer reduction before the Ukraine, before the Russian crisis. 13% reduction in global fertilizer was already here well before that. And herbicide shortages, which were going to knock global supply chains of anything grains down about 18 to 20% anyway without Russia. So I think there's a few maskings of causes here. I think it's being more controlled, and especially your control to food. So Lynette, thanks for joining, because I'm curious about the control to money and how we protect ourselves.
We all need to be looking at this seriously so that we are not dependent on this system, because let them come in and say, here, this will save you. And people will be so hungry, so hopeless, so scared that they'll accept it. And then, I mean, you lived in China for quite some time, right?
I
And,
did.
you know, what kind of a hold do the Chinese have over their population?
Complete, to the point of rounding you up and taking you away at any point in time for the wrong word.
For the wrong word. Yep.
Not even the wrong action. Forget the action's way wrong word. You're gone.
So I always felt like China was showing the rest of the world how to 100% completely control their population. And you had mentioned about the rice shortage and those kinds of things. Do you think that's what we're seeing or going to see here?
It is, because if you look at the imports from China, they have about over half the world's everything in the country for food right now, from corn to rice to wheat, soybean. If you look at those charts that have been coming out, I think Goldman Sachs putting out the export figures there. China holds at least half of the world's what has already been harvested and processed bean, corn, and wheat supply in the country. So what is on their side? Why are they buying so much? Well, if you look back, their rice and their wheat crop is getting wiped out at the moment. It'll be some of the, well, the headline was like the lowest wheat harvest ever in China. But, you know, their history goes back 4,000 years, and it's hard to, you know, do a direct comparison of what a dynasty looked like back in the Huang dynasty and circa, you know, 2,000, 3,000 years prior, or what the more modern dynasties would look like, you know, 1,000 years ago compared to today. The landmass wasn't the same. The capitals weren't the same. Nanjing was the old capital. You know, you got the warring states and all these things. So to say it's the lowest wheat harvest ever in Chinese history this year, right now, that's a huge statement to say.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but you understand why they were bringing it in. Like, what they know the cycle too. They know this grand solar minimum cycle that's triggered by electromagnetic effects on the sun that throw the jet streams and the cloud cells out of sync. They know this cycle probably better than anybody, except for maybe the Arab countries, because they had the Arab trade routes going on for so many thousands of years as well. So those two cultures, if you look back in history, have the longest written records and recordings from their travelers going out across what was the known world at that time, which was a good half the globe. I mean, if you go from, let's say, England all the way over to Kamchatka Peninsula and Russia, or all the way down through Indonesia to Australia, you know, that is a vast portion of the planet. So they had records from climatic changes for thousands, plural, of years through those areas. So they know when this starts to happen, that maps up, that maps out. Okay, then they get into these crop losses. And they called it the mandate from heaven. So this is literally what they call it. The mandate from heaven's removed and the emperor has no authority to rule the people anymore. Well, the mandate from heaven was a switch in electromagnetic current coming down, changing our star and what happens electromagnetic field and magnetic fields on our planet. That's exactly what that was in reference to time and time again. Well, it's on a 400-year cycle, the collapse and rise of these empires or dynasties through Chinese history, but they always were so cleanly referencing it came from the heavens first. And that's what, so if you lock our jet streams and our cloud cells really tightly, we get perfect growth seasons, exact plant dates, exact harvest dates. Once those go out the window, and we're seeing what we're seeing now, where late freezes, early blizzards, summer in the middle of winter, winter in the middle of summer, you can't grow crops. And once these cycles are back, you'll know the duration. Now, who's riding on top of a natural cycle to take advantage of it is the question. 12,000-year cycle, 400-year cycle, whatever. It's a cycle, and it's known in a duration onset period, exit period, and then the deep middle period. So somebody knows this cycle is here again and taking advantage of it. So Chinese are going to continue to buy as much as they can, but Brazil is going to get wiped out because they won't have the fertilizers to produce. And it's going to be a terror show moving up through this May. It will be the recollection that there won't be enough fertilizers to grow what we need for the planet, Northern Hemisphere. Simple math. October is the harvest time. When they look in the fields and go, well, there's nothing out there. Uh-oh, that's going to be terror. And then when they switch to the Southern Hemisphere, when we come into our winter, like, yay, Southern Hemisphere can grow stuff. And Brazil will be like, we're still waiting for the fertilizers. We can't get anything in the ground for y'all. Then what? And then we go through an entire year of no plant or very limited output of Southern Hemisphere and almost nothing out of the Northern Hemisphere. You're going to pay you're going to pay $100 for a loaf of bread?
Oh, that's the thing. If you have $100, they just did a study on how it's not a big problem for the wealthy to weather this higher inflation. No, because they don't have to choose between buying that loaf of bread or putting that tank of gas in their car. But most of the population, these are the choices that they're having to make. And they're having to make them right now, let alone when a loaf of bread does get to $100 a loaf. So is that, I mean, you asked what comes first. Is it the food, people being hungry, or the monetary system collapsing? And I'm watching the monetary system collapse as we sit here and speak. And it's patterns. It's always patterns. So you're talking about the long cycle, but I can also talk about the currency life cycles when we go into a government system that collapses. And we're at the very end. The start of it was 1913. The end of it, is it going to be 1923? It could be. We've got so much that's coming up that is supposed to transition then. The LIBOR, 610 trillion in notional value derivatives, which means who knows how much that really is. That's about to shift. That happens in 2023. It was supposed to happen in 2021 or 2021. And okay, it got postponed because they can't make this shift. So Mike, I have a question for you, David, too, because all of this talk about climate change, when we know that these are the normal cycles, is this about the government getting into position to stay in control, even though what we're really dealing with is a natural cycle?
Oh, 100%, 1,000% yes. It is about control of power and control of the new monetary system as the old one collapses. It's been like, when I really started doing this Adapt 2030 channel and, talking to people like John Casey and writing to Dr. Abudzamatov over in the Kovar Observatory and trying to really get a lot of feel out there of really how deep are these cycles and are they true and who knows about this and are governments responding? It was more about are governments responding now that they know the cycle is inbound? Because the way it was explained to me, the research I did, global warming as we know it, what started when, back in late 1980s, early 1990s, was a cover story for you, the average person, to see all these changes happening with the extreme storms, the increased floods, the things that don't make sense, the extreme temperatures here, the low temperature, everything falling out of sync of the natural cycle of stability, which we had for 100 years. Well, everybody was used to it. Then there was an excuse for it. People wouldn't get panicked over a global warming thing. Everything was blamed on global warming, but it's run its course. Because if you look at the Greenland ice data coming out from the DMI, which is a Danish Meteorological Institute, just even these last few days, the amount of ice is now above the 30-year running average, which means that for the last year on the 30-year average basis, it didn't decline below that level. And if we look at the global temperatures, this is lower tropospheric temperatures from Dr. Roy Spencer, we're right back down at that 0.0 mark again. So wait a second, I thought we were running away at 1, 2, 3 degrees Celsius, but wait, if you're looking over the 40-year average that they were screaming about the satellites to prove this global warming thing, we're right back to the baseline. And I hope you do your own research. Please go to drroyspencer.com. And you have a lower tropospheric temperatures there. He runs the University of Alabama, Huntsville satellite data set. I think it's version 6.0 that they're using now. And then Danish Meteorological Institute, DMI, or Polar Portal. You can do both. And then you can take a look at the massive, unbelievable, massive ice gains. They had something go up to like 13.7 gigatons last year. That was off their chart, literally by 1.3 pips above their chart. It pegged at 12 gigatons on a daily gain, but they went up to 13.7 and they never changed it. They still left the chart at 12 and it was literally off the chart. And just a couple of days ago, they got another one that was nearly at the very top of the chart there. So when you start to take a look at the overall averages of everything, it has run its course. Literally, science can prove now that the planet's starting to come back into equilibrium on the cooling. So if you knew that too, that this was the cycle of the entry of it here, 2021 to 2023 overlaps with your time cycle too. Like, it's too coincidental that the economy and everything being reset and the awareness that the global warming is really not warming anymore and the cycles are out of kilter and we're going into food shortages all in these same years. It can't be just coincidence.
Yeah. It never really is coincidence. It never really is. But we have a choice too, right? I mean, we don't have to allow the full takeover, but people need to be aware. And that's the biggest challenge. That's the biggest challenge that you and I face are people, the awareness and then the belief. And then, of course, you have to do something about it.
So can I ask you a couple questions? Finance?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. Yes.
Okay. So the headlines coming out that Saudi Arabia will now take yuan for oil, and there's going to be some new refineries built that are going to be specifically Russian oil filled, exported to China, all paid for in yuan outside the dollar on that end of things. But you talked about the derivatives unwind here. So, with all the banking lockups and the sanctions and things, there's going to be a lot of missed payments. So
Yes.
how does that default, when it comes out on a derivative default, I mean, the money has to be pulled back in somehow, but I mean, it doesn't seem like it's really affected or affecting the economy at the moment. So you can talk about derivatives fallouts, but I just don't see anything in the real world happening. So I just don't understand that part of how it works.
Well, because it's really hidden, and it's the ASID or ASDI that actually controls whether or not something is deemed a default. So we wouldn't necessarily see it until they lose control of it, until it gets too big. And I think that, what you were talking about in Saudi Arabia with taking the yuan is a clear indication. I mean, I think you only get to use this card one time, that if you as a government, you don't like what somebody else is doing, well, the US, boom, with the SWIFT system, which is the global payment system, they just cut you out. And now you've got the NATO allies and even Switzerland, that's supposed to be neutral, starting to step into line. You will do what we want, except that now you've really got two big factions. And I think that what we're already in, and I think it's staged, but I think that what we're already in is a World War III, right? Because we've been watching since 2008, we've been watching a globally coordinated central bank movement, whether it's deflation, inflation, reflation, whatever. But you're seeing too many coordinated moves, and now all of a sudden these moves are going in the opposite direction, and it justifies the inflation, doesn't it? So, we've been witnessing the rise in financial power of the East and the decline in the West, but that would certainly, I liken this to kind of a bridge that's in a storm and it's swinging back and forth and it's swinging back and forth. And with every swing, it just gets weaker and weaker and weaker until the whole system collapses. And the derivatives, it's, look, Warren Buffett, not my favorite person either, but he did mention that derivatives were financial weapons of mass destruction. And when you look at the patterns of financialization, in other words, the whole world, and they really started in the 80s once President Nixon gave full control of inflation to the central banks. But all of these products have been physical products have been turned into financial products that then can be leveraged. And that's the derivative. A derivative is derived from something that's real, okay? Derivatives, silver derivatives, gold derivatives. Before they changed the accounting method, for every 1 physical ounce of gold that exists, there were 62,000 ounces of derivative gold. And so it's worse now. I guarantee you, it's way worse now, but it's buried under their formulas. They can keep that going and floating, and they can keep it invisible until they can't. And that's the point that we're getting to. Because if you've got 610 trillion notional. And whenever you hear anybody say nominal or notional, what you're really hearing, what they're really saying is that this is only what you see on the surface. It's not really the truth that's at risk. So 610 notional derivative contracts with an average, according to I think the IMF or the BIS, an average contract with 1,000 times leverage. What happens when they try to take it from one interest rate benchmark to another interest rate benchmark? They ran a test with 80 trillion, and that was in 2020, and it was a big October, and it was a big fat fail. We knew they were running the test, and then it went dead silent. And about 3 weeks after the test, they came out and they said, yeah, we're postponing this until 2023. They can't do it, because the other big piece of that is that if you're looking at one benchmark and you're going to convert all these contracts with valuation against that one benchmark to contracts against a different benchmark that reads different, that means the valuation of that contract is going to be different. And that matters to all of the banks and the non-financial institutions, non-bank financial institutions that create this garbage, sell this garbage, and whether you realize it or not, if you're investing in mutual funds, ETFs, any of that stuff, futures contracts, right? I mean, this is your exposure. And what a great excuse for the retirement crisis that we're also in, right? Well, when the markets implode, and they will go up before they implode, but they will implode, you know, what a great excuse, because who are you going to call? Who are you going to complain to? And then they give you the digital wallet, which we all have, big fanfare, and now you don't hear anything about it, not because we don't have it in place, but because they're not ready for you to realize that it's in place. And now you're desperate and you accept anything that the government wants you to accept, or you're cut off because you're not self-sufficient, because you are dependent on the food system and on the financial system. Now, that's a place I'm glad I'm not.
Is there a point where we'll ever see a default on the metal deliveries to the point where the public will find out that there's not enough metal? I mean, what would the trigger be that, okay, we just don't have the metals anymore? We really are in a deficit where we can't deliver and there's really not enough. And what you're seeing out there was an illusion. And we really only have about 2 ounces of gold left for the demand for an entire industry behind here. And we just can't, all those guys are under sanctions over there. The mines are closed over there. There's war over here. We can't melt. At what point does it come to the real to the head where they find out there's a shortage on it?
When it becomes too expensive to maintain the illusion. And we just kind of got a taste of that over at the LME with the nickel.
Yeah, that was huge.
It is huge because, and they've been glitching ever since. So they cannot get it back together again. And what that does is it's a loss of confidence. And these things can all stay in place as long as there is confidence in the system, because it's all a house of cards. So, you know, when you ask me, are we going to know? Sure we are, just like we're going to know that there's a shortage of food. And also what happens with all of those financial instruments when they do implode, or the money, we go into the hyperinflation. Now, when will that happen in earnest? Well, I feel like we're at the beginning of it, no doubt about it. This is not transitory. When you look at energy prices, oil prices back above $100 a barrel again, and you will see this when it becomes too expensive. Because what we've also been experiencing, and this is a big key, it's part of the pattern. Those that do know, like you mentioned China, and we could also mention the wealthy, those that are part of this understand what's happening. And they are shifting out of intangibles into tangibles, into gold, into silver. Are these coming back on the market? Nope, I'm not selling mine. least not at this point. There will come a point when it will be time to convert them into other income producing assets. But for the moment, when I buy, I just buy. I am not selling. And you'll find that a lot of people at the top, that's actually what's happening. They're getting out while the getting's good, just like we've seen every single time, right? Those that know, they get into position. China is getting into position. Russia was getting into position for this eventuality that we're dealing with now. But yeah, as long as it is not too expensive and the people that matter to the system still have time, but once they have repositioned themselves, then let it collapse.
Because right now you're seeing the Canadian Mint saying that, at the bare minimum, you're looking at 3 to 6 weeks out. A lot of places ordering online saying we're completely out of stock, or it's just a pre-order. If we can even get the silver to run some sort of minting, and that's on the base level of somebody buying from just what's so-called Main Street buying. But the signals are getting out there that, wait, why is all the silver disappearing from where you and I could buy literally just online or going in to a store? And a lot of physical stores have been closing too.
Right.
Heaven forbid you can't go into a government office and complain anymore because they're all closed because of COVID. So they see how they transitioned everything online. So now where's all the silver? It disappeared completely from your and I grasp almost. I mean, not yours, obviously, because you're still at the wholesale level, but somebody who wants to buy out there. I mean, what's the deal with that disappearance of everything suddenly? Out of stock on everything, not going to get it back, too bad?
Well, that is really what happens. I mean, I think that ITM, we are really fortunate because we've been in business since 95 and we have very deep relationships with wholesalers. So, and please understand that this is not the area that I work in anymore, so I can't really speak to the day-to-day availability. But what I can tell you is that a lot of things that we used to be able to get easily and readily, like you said, they're simply not available anymore. So for me, when I'm building my metals portfolio, I want to look at function. What am I trying to accomplish? If I'm bartering, as example, if it's about bartering and making sure that I can put a tank of gas in my car regardless of the price of it, then I want silver and I want it in different sizes. Well, fortunately, I built my portfolio when it was easy to get all of those fractional pieces, etc. Now, I don't think it's as easy to do that. And the same thing with gold. There are all different kinds of gold. People will go to, I find this interesting, and I know that I'm quite unique in this perspective, but I go from my personal experiences that I've lived through because that's what I can trust. I don't care about hopium. I care about reality. And when I'm looking at gold, personally, I only buy collectible gold. Why? Because I had an uncle that was a major antique dealer, and when I was about 10 years old, he showed me 2 huge floor safes in his home, and that would have been 1964, when it was illegal to hold more than 5 ounces of gold, and he probably had at least 3,000 ounces in there in the legal way. And he did it legally because they were pre-1933, and our government had confiscated gold. And when you go back to all of the wars, the Civil War, the War of 1812, the Revolutionary War, and then again, I mean, as we were transitioning into this perpetual central banking era, they confiscated gold. And they had to because that's how they fund the wars. And we've been in a perpetual state of war since 1989. So people go, oh, they wouldn't do that again. Well, then you're living on hopium. I want to be, just like I want to be connected to, I want to make sure that I can get all the food and everything that I need, but I want to make sure that I can hold my wealth. And when people say, oh, well, I just wouldn't give it to them, I want the kind of gold that I can go out and buy other assets with. So therefore, I want the kind that would still be legal if the other is not legal. And I can't guarantee either one, but I don't know. If it's happened the same way every time and we're doing the same thing, expecting anything else is hopium. And that doesn't really work very well for me personally.